Hi, welcome back to another message here on the Gowanda Assembly of God YouTube channel. I'm excited today to start a new series called Wages, Gifts, and Treasures. I want to read a verse from, I always say a verse, then it's usually two. I want to read a verse from Matthew 6 this morning as we open up. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. I'm going to start a new series today, and it really was totally born out of sitting down this week and talking with someone in the room over here, and I just realized that some of what I was sharing was just so true about life that it was like God just dropped it in my lap, and I sat down with a notebook and put a series together. So it's going to be 4 Sundays. We're going to talk about wages, gifts, and treasures. So this week, next week, and then Labor Day weekend, I actually am not going to be here on Sunday. So Pam is going to help me out leading worship, and we're going to have a special guest speaker here that I'm not going to reveal today. Yes. No, because if I revealed it today, then there would be 2 weeks to prepare, and then when I got back, I would be upset because 150 people showed up the week I wasn't here, and then that's what would happen. So I guarantee it's going to be a great Sunday. All 5 of these Sundays are going to be awesome. So you'll have 2 in this series, and then a guest speaker, and then 2 to cap it off. So I want to start today with just a simple picture. This evokes all kinds of thoughts in people. You know? Okay, enough of that. I want to talk for just a minute about some of the thoughts of this and who we are, but I have to preface it because of where we are as a country right now and where the media is and social media and politics and all this stuff, okay? I believe that this country was founded on godly principles. And there are things that are true that not a lot of people know. Like when George Washington became the first president, he said in his inaugural speech, no nation founded by God could expect to forget him and continue in the blessings he's bestowed. That day, he walked from Federal Hall to a church called St. Paul's, and he prayed there. That church was at that time part of a large piece of property that would eventually be the spot where the World Trade Center would be built. That's not coincidental. That something would happen that's a bit of a sign that God is not happy with where this nation has gone in part in that time. There are many things that this nation has done in thought processes, and honestly, it's natural. It's what people do when they're blessed and they get rich. They get comfortable and they don't sense their need for him, and they get complacent and apathetic, and he has to get their attention. It's common. It's happened in societies for thousands of years. The nation of Israel, this is their story. They come back to God. King Josiah reads the law. The people weep. They come back to him. They tear down their altars and their false gods. They throw them away. And within a couple of generations, they're kind of headed back into that situation because God has blessed them. They've got complacent. Everything's comfortable. They don't really need him. They start back down the hill. Here's what I want to be careful not to say. Do I think that the United States as a nation is the problem with the world? Do I think we're this big bully who's gone around the world and all the problems that are out there are because we're just jerks? I don't think that's a real accurate picture. And I'm not representing a lot of the thought that's out there. I think the division in this country is mostly painted right now by what you read on social media and what sells news. But I think it's moving in that direction. And probably the biggest reason for the issues we do really legitimately face in this country is that we believe that we determine what's good and bad and what's the right way to go and what's not. And we definitely do have a bit of a skewed view of the world as a rich nation. That's true. So here's what I want to talk about as we're looking at this flag. There are things that are great about this nation and the culture that we live in. that I think are godly things. Like, in this country, you could start out poor. And if you work, you can earn something for yourself. Do I believe that no matter who you are, if you work hard enough, you can have everything you want? No, that's not realistic. Can you excel and earn for yourself with hard work in this country? Yeah, absolutely. I believe that thoughts like, if you work, you should be rewarded for that, is godly. Ecclesiastes says we're actually made to work, and that part of God's plan is for us to enjoy the fruits that are produced by our work. That's right in the Bible. That's true. And Ben agrees wholeheartedly. If he cries loud enough, he should get fed. That's the American way, right? So we know that, listen, we have sayings like, you get what you pay for, right? If you don't work, you don't eat. That's actually in Proverbs. Nothing's free. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. We have these principles, and this country's built on that. And sometimes that gets taken to a place it doesn't belong. If I've worked for what I have, and you haven't worked as hard as me, I'm not obligated to give you squat. That's not a biblical worldview. That's a capitalist worldview, and it's part of what makes this nation great is that type of thought process, but that in itself is not necessarily a godly thought process. Owning property, I think, is something God put in place. Do we take that too far? I think we do. I think healthy boundaries are good. Sometimes we build selfish boundaries, right? So where I'm going with this is that there are times when this American flag and even the sound of Sweet Home Alabama are almost like a core part of what we think and feel about our faith. Sometimes we get into this mentality where good old boy, red-blooded American, take care of your neighbor, that's Christian. And although there are principles that this nation was built on that are still alive today, our patriotism to a country or a culture is not necessarily what it is to be a Christian. They are simply two separate things. There are some who really feel strongly that to not fully support our nation and the flag would be to turn your back on God. Many of the principles in God we trust, one nation under God, those are very godly things, and I think we need to be supportive and patriotic to our nation. But here's a question. Does that mean I should unquestioningly support everything our nation stands for? Not necessarily. Our allegiance is to Him first, and to the nation He has put us in second. He says, honor the rulers and the laws of your land. We're only obligated to go against that when it's strictly in the face of what He has said. If our nation says something that sin is okay, then we don't stand for that. But we try our best to be the best citizens of our nation we can, positive members of our society. I want to look at a story from the book of Matthew and just start to unpack a little bit the difference between the way our culture works and the way a believer, a disciple of Jesus, thinks. Matthew chapter 20 has the story of the laborers in the vineyard. It's quite a long thing. I didn't put it up here. I'm going to read it to you, and then I want to focus on a couple of points, okay? So if you want to follow along in your Bible, that's fine. If you want to close your eyes and imagine the story, that's fine too. Matthew 20, starting at verse 1. For the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for a denarius a day, which is a day's wage, he sent them into his vineyard. And going out about the third hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace, just for reference, the third hour would be about 3 hours into the day. So let's say these first laborers, they were in the vineyard 6 a.m. So he's in the marketplace at 9. All the sleeper-inners are now in the marketplace, the people who weren't there when he went out hiring the first time. And to them he said, "You go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right I will give you." So they went, going out again about the 6th hour, and the 9th hour he did the same. And about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing, and he said to them, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" They said to him, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You go into the vineyard too." And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first." And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. Now when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." But he replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I chose to give to the last worker as I gave to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? So the last will be first, and the first last." As an American, is that fair? It's not. Okay, so point number one I want to recognize is that when we hear this story Jesus told that describes the kingdom of heaven, our culture alive in us is somewhat at odds with this story. So point number one is that there is something alive in us, in our culture, that says what the kingdom of heaven is described as doesn't sit quite right. Okay? So we've established that there's something here in us that's different than the way he looks at it. Okay? So all that we think of in our culture isn't the way he sees things. And there are some things that we need to begin to see differently. Okay? Now let's pick a couple of points out of this. Not only is the landowner here right and a representation of God himself in the story actually says that what he did was right. Listen. And going out about the 3rd hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace and said to them, "You go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right, I will give you." He tells them that he will give them what's right. And then it says, so they went, going out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour, he did the same. I think we can assume that it says he did the same. He likely said the same thing to these workers who went out 6 hours into the day and 9 hours into the day. He said, "Go work in my vineyard as well, and when the day is done, I will give you what's right." As a person who has a job and works for money, it just feels like that can't be right. Like if I work harder, I should get more. And realistically, if I hired some people to do some work in my business and I did this, I would have issues with them, wouldn't I? Yeah, you probably would. Now, let me just throw something out there. In our society now, families that are mixed are very, very common. I'm from a mixed family. Megan's from a mixed family, has step-siblings. When I was about 23, my mom passed away. My dad remarried. She has 3 sons. Now, I'll give you just a part of how stories out there can be. There are stories where a successful woman loses her husband, and she's financially secure. And she marries someone that's not as financially secure. She has a couple of kids she brings into the relationship. Let's say she's worth $2.5 million. And he's a landscaper. He makes $50,000, $60,000 a year. Good guy, not wealthy. Let's say at 70 years old, out of the blue, she has a heart attack and dies. Who should get her money? The answer to the question is, who am I in the picture? Am I the husband or am I the kids? Because that will determine who gets the money. In my situation, my dad started a business about 1984 that's still alive. Worked his tail off, mildly successful at what he does. He can pay his bills. He's doing okay. His wife, my stepmom, was from a less well-off financially situation when they met. She had been through some rough stuff. She had been in an abusive relationship. They got married, and I know that my dad has thoughts sometimes of, what do you do? Because you just wonder. You just wonder, who's going to think that, this, that? You just don't know what people are thinking, and all of us are consumed at times about, what's who think? Here's my perspective. Let me go back to the story of, we have a lady who worth $2.5 million, which, by the way, that is no relation to my dad at all, okay? That is not worth $2.5 million. Let's say that she passes, and the question arises, who gets that? Here's the answer. Whoever she says. I remember telling my dad one time, because he just had said to me, I think about this sometimes. I think about what people think, and I just wonder, and I think about it. And I said to him, Dad, if you left every penny you had to somebody we didn't even know, who was completely undeserving of it, it's not my place to complain, because it's not mine. What kids do so often is they see their parents' property as theirs long before it is. And it's just not right. We think from a capitalist mindset, well, that's going to be mine, so we start planning and then we're mad, and families get ripped apart when people pass away because of what people have as a perception of what they should have. My attitude is, whatever that person wanted done with their property is their decision. And if I have a problem with that, then I believe that people ought to tell me what to do with my possessions, because that's what I'm doing. Right? So whose possessions are all of this? They're God's. Okay, time out. That's getting a little too personal now. Nobody can tell me what to do with my stuff is great. God bless America. When all of a sudden he owns it all and I have no say of what is mine, that's a whole different thing. That is countercultural. And let me tell you, if you live your life that way, there are plenty of people who sit in churches on Sunday who will take issue with that. That's not how it should be. But it is. Remember the rich young ruler? Rich young ruler comes to Jesus and says, what do I need to do to inherit the kingdom of heaven? He says, 10 commandments. As if Jesus didn't know he already was trying to keep them all. He says, I keep them all. I've kept them since I was a child. He says, okay. As if he doesn't know the guy's rich. Go and sell all your possessions, give them to the poor, and come and follow me. And it says that the young man went away very sad because he was very wealthy. And he didn't want to part with that money. But what Jesus did very mercifully is he just laid out for the guy exactly what it was that he wanted to have possession of, that Jesus wanted to see him let go of. And the cool thing is, we don't know what that rich young ruler did. I've wondered a lot of times, could that have been Joseph of Arimathea? Could that have been the man who donated his grave for Christ to be buried in? We don't know what the next year, 2 years, 3 years held in this young ruler's life. I know for sure that the most impactful thing Jesus could have said is what he said. Because his heart was to seek and save those things that were lost and to call out to what needed change. Check out this. About the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing, and he said to them, "Why do you stand here all day?" And they said, "Because no one's hired us." He says to them, "You go into the vineyard too." And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, now this is a whole nother point that I had never thought of, and probably you have never thought of. The owner of the land is not the only one who thinks what he's doing is fair. His foreman, this man who works for him and is likely, because of the culture there, a part of his household, a part of his family, knows very well the way this man handles his goods, the way he rules, and the way he makes decisions. He says to the foreman, "Call the laborers and pay them their wages." This does not say that he said, "Hey, Bill, give everybody the same wage. I know they're going to moan. Give them all the same wage. And by the way, start with the guys I just hired an hour ago. Don't worry, you'll be able to tell they're the ones that aren't sweaty yet. Just arrange them in order of dirt, and you'll have it." Right? The ones with the sunburn, they're last. That's what it says. We have endured the scorching heat of the day. So the sunburned ones are last. You're going to pay them last. You realize if he had paid them first, no one would have known the difference until they saw each other at the bar? No one would have known the difference. And the guys who were paid over would probably not have said anything. They probably would have been like, "Dude, tomorrow, about 4 in the afternoon, we're going to the market." Okay? But he doesn't do that. And his foreman doesn't question him. I'm going to suggest that we can come to a place in our lives where the way he does things is normal and right to us. When he says, "Give that person some money." And our brain has learned to come to a place where we say, okay, not, "Time out, they're going to go and buy booze with that. We can't do that." Now, if he doesn't say specifically, we are to use the judgment he's given us, okay? Let me in this modern day where nobody thinks critically, out there in the world, not here, but out there, I am not saying any good thing you could possibly do, just do it because that's what God would want you to do, and just blindly throw yourself at the world and just waste everything you've got on nothing just because that's what Jesus would do. That's not what he did, okay? Example, guy at the well. There was probably 1,500 people at the well. The story is that he healed one. Doesn't say he stuck around and healed them all. Actually says he went away, and when people are like, "No, stay here, there's lots of people you need to impact," he's like, "Sorry, I got to go over here." He was following the voice of his Father and being obedient. He didn't, as a man, want to go through the hell of laying down his life, but he did because he was obedient. And he knew what he was being asked to do by his Father was right and was good. That's what I'm talking about. You see somebody who's poor, and God says, "Give them a meal." You do. You come across somebody and you feel guilty, ask him if he wants you to do anything. Because sometimes guilty is why they're there. Because sometimes there are situations where everybody in somebody's life feels guilty about where they are, and that's why they can stay there. That's not what he did. That wasn't what he did. He said he came to seek and save that which is lost. He didn't come to seek the parking meter of where they're sitting and keep feeding it quarters so they could sit there their whole life. That's not what he did. So this foreman, he says, call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first. And he pays them all the same. And then the guys who had been working the longest say, hold on a minute, because they're expecting. He gave them a day's wage for an hour. I ought to have 12 denarii coming. That's a denarius for an hour. I ought to have 12 coming because I worked 12 hours. That's fair. Pays them all the same. And then when the guys hired first start to complain, he says what? He replied to one of them, friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to the last worker as I gave to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? I have that phrase highlighted, what belongs to me. In a land of property and opportunity, the human nature works hard to achieve and gain things for itself. We are driven as a democratic society, as a republic, as a capitalistic-based society. We are driven by human nature. Is it godly to pay a man for his work? Yes. But if the only reason we work is for the pay, that's not the way it's meant to be. That's not how his world works. His world works on the premise of, I work because he's beautiful. I work because he owns me. He bought my life and redeemed it. And for that reason, I work to honor him. What does the word say? Whatever your hands find to do, do it heartily as unto the Lord. It says work as unto God, not as unto man. If I'm working to manipulate the one paying me, I'm not working for God. Now, if I work my tail off and he blesses me with $1 million a year job, he's got plans for that too. It may be for me to have a nice house. It may be for me to live in the house I'm in and give it all away. The question is, who's in control? Never forget one time I did a fast. Fasted a day, fasted a second day. I had planned on fasting 2 days. I was like, all right, close of the day, I'm going to eat something. I was in what's now our schoolroom, sitting in front of the computer, and like God says to me, how about another day? And I was like, are you serious? Now I'm in this spot where it's like, is he asking me? Is he not? Am I going to eat? That's the torturous part of being on fasting, when you don't know if you're going to eat or not. Never forget this moment. He says to me, don't you ever forget that the fasting is mine, not yours. This is not your fast. This is not your goal. This isn't your 2-day little achievement. If I call you to fast, I own that fast. You're on my time. And think of the difference in attitude. Okay, he said to do this, bada bing, accomplished the goal. Now I'm going to have some rewards, so I want to celebrate this is done. Our attitude really there should be, where are we now? You know, you asked me to do this, is this the end of it? It's just this submitted attitude in all of life. Like we talked about in the last couple of weeks, your job and your thoughts and relationships, even how you handle tough spots in relationships. Like, God, do you want me to just like be honest and really kind of be a little bit blunt here, or do you want me to just hold back? The key is that he drives. That's not an American thing. Him owning it and him being the boss is not an American thing. You know how we view that? We view that as slavery, which is bad. But a slave of God's has never had it so good. Has never had it so good. And that's what he's called us to be. That's what baptism is. I'm going into the grave. I'm coming back out. Here's a little saying for you. God is not subject to my opinion of what is fair. I have had so many conversations with people who just have never really understood this. And when I say that, I'm not saying they're just jerks, they're just morons, idiots, stupid. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying they have not come in contact with this God, the righteousness and the love and passion, but the judgment and justice of this God. And the problem they have is that they have not found a God in the Bible that matches with everything they expect a God should be. And because he hasn't met their expectations, they've rejected him. Now, let me be careful on this too, because there are people who have been through dramatically tough situations. There are people who have lost children, who have lost loved ones, who have dealt with disease their entire lives. And they are a part of a group who will say, how, if God is a loving God, how could he do this? How could a loving God allow people to go to hell? Those are legitimate questions for a human being. But coming to know this is such a huge part of the answer. Because the assumption we make when we state questions like that, although they are valid to us, is that I have considered all there is to know and have come to this judgment on God, and he needs to answer me. Until he does, I will not give in to that. That is such a dangerous place to live, to make the assumption that you understand it all. There are going to be so many countless moments in heaven where people look back and say, oh my goodness, if I had known he was doing that, oh my goodness, I would be praising his name. I'd be running down the street praising his name had I known that was going on. I tell people all the time, I don't know why my mom died at 46 years old of a brain tumor. I don't know why Mary at 16 lost her mom. I don't know why my wife at 16 lost her mom. I don't know why Mindy's going through what she is right now. But I know that someday, with tears in our eyes, we will say, oh my goodness, how beautiful is that? Because it will all make sense, because we will see his plan. Paul says, we see in a glass darkly. What that means, at that time, a mirror was as polished as you could get silver. That's what you saw. It wasn't glass, it wasn't clear the way it is now. He said, we see as in a glass darkly, but then we will see face to face. I will know as I am known. We will know things in the way that he knows us. And when the Bible talks about beings surrounding the throne, praising him all day, all they do all day is fly around his throne. They say, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. You know why they do that? Because they want to. Yeah. These beings are covered with eyes, so they can see it better than everybody else, and it's all they care to do, day and night. In God we trust. Let me ask you a question. For the most part, in this nation of good people, is this what we believe, or is that what we believe? Because this is defined by the Bible, and this is defined by my thoughts. What is good? Good is not judging anybody. Good is letting people live and have whatever beliefs they want. God is sovereign. God has said, this is right and this is wrong, and even inside of that, there's probably a lot you don't get about me. God's saying this. But I'm going to say what's right and what's wrong, and my judgments are right. And when I pay this guy who you think doesn't deserve it as much as I paid you, I'm not the one who's wrong. You're the one who's not seeing my world correctly. There's a big difference between in God we trust and in good we trust, because what's good? Somebody hands me $1 million and I buy a brand new house and give a couple of friends some stuff and support 10 World Vision kids at $30 a month. 10. I'll be like, God is good. You know how many wells that $1 million could drill? How many lives that could save? Do you know how many women and girls could be saved from human trafficking with $1 million? But yet I would buy things for myself and call that good. Wow. A little too close to home. How good are we? I think we mix comfortable and good up. Unless your life revolves around and is dominated by the Word of God, the theme of your life is in good we trust. Unless you know what God has said, who He is, and His heart, you can't say, in God we trust. Because you don't know what that even is a lot of times. The best you can do is in good we trust. And have your basic idea, a lot of it will be right about what's good and bad. Not all of it. He wants to be the definition of that. This is like the slogan of humanist organizations all over the place. Good without God. I can be good without God. I'm looking for good without God. Humanism, by definition, is the belief that man really is at the center of things, and that the aim is to bring health and wellness and good and peace and fairness to all men. It's a worthy goal, but mankind is at the center, and man says what's right and wrong. And humanism can never have a set standard that lasts for long, because morality is relative to the society, so it will always be moving in a direction. It will never stay the same. If what you believe is in good we trust, man decides what good is. Humanism really is the definition of what that faith is. You're taking some principles from this God figure, but at the end of the day, man decides what good is, not God. Psalm 14:1 says, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They do abominable deeds. There is no one who does good." Let's look at another verse in Psalms. Psalm 53:1. "The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt, doing abominable iniquity. There is no one who does good." The wisest thing we can do as human beings is recognize that there is a creator God, that we answer to Him, that His word is the ultimate authority in this entire world, and we form our lives to His word and His heart. And inside of that, we are probably not going to be the most popular people ever, because no one wants to do that. And when we do that, other people's conscience are pressed in that direction. And they either have to say, God really is the ruler and I'm going to submit to Him, or they have to come up with some kind of reason of why He's not. And that's just aggravating. So that's why they get mad at us. Right? So if God is right and is the creator and master, and if He means what He has said, do any of us really want what we deserve? No. Today's entire message is just setting the stage to look at what does God say about wages, gifts, and treasures. But first we have to recognize that we don't think the way He does. And some of the culture that is who we are, we just need to question. We need to consider the possibility of a paradigm shift. All right? As we close today's sermon, I want to encourage you to give God ample opportunity
to influence you, or you will be influenced only by the culture around you and common thoughts of the day, which will obviously lead us to a less than accurate view of who we really are and why we're here and what our goals should be. I hope you have a great week.